Welcome the anointed ones. The moment people realize you can't be rushed, rattled, or guilt-tripped is the moment their confidence collapses. There's a strange silence that happens right before someone panics. Not the loud kind, but the kind where you can almost hear thoughts scrambling for grip. That's the moment this story begins. Not when you raised your voice, not when you proved a point, but when you didn't need to. Somewhere along the line, something clicked for you, and they felt it before they could explain it. The penny dropped, and it didn't land gently. Here's a fact most people don't like admitting. Under pressure, the human brain doesn't rise to its best thinking. It defaults to its most rehearsed habits. Neuroscience backs this. When stress hits, people don't suddenly become strategic. They become predictable, emotional, reactive, loud. And that's where you quietly stepped out of the crowd. While others were burning energy arguing with reality, you were reading the manual. That's not arrogance. That's adaptation. You didn't become colder. You became clearer. You stopped confusing urgency with importance. You stopped mistaking chaos for movement. And without announcing it, without a dramatic transformation montage, you turned into someone who solves problems while others are still explaining why the problem is unfair. That's unsettling. People are comfortable with passion, even with anger. What throws them off is efficiency without theatrics. No rant, no revenge speech, just results. It's honestly rude how effective that is. There's also something unintentionally funny about watching people realize they can't bait you anymore. They throw emotional breadcrumbs, expecting a reaction, and you just don't pick them up. At some point, even they notice it. The facial expressions change. The conversations shorten. The energy shifts. Not because you're trying to intimidate anyone, but because you've stopped participating in unnecessary nonsense. And nothing confuses a noisy world more than someone who refuses to overcomplicate things. This isn't about being heartless. It's about being finished with inefficiency, mental, emotional, and social. You didn't wake up one day and decide to be different. Life trained you, pressure refined you, repetition hardened your thinking. Now you move with a kind of quiet certainty that doesn't need permission. And that's why they're gasping, not out of fear, but out of sudden awareness. They're finally dealing with someone who doesn't argue with problems, they end them. Number one, you don't react emotionally because emotions are no longer where you solve problems. At some point, you realize that reacting emotionally wasn't strength, it was delay. Not because emotions are useless, but because they're slow. They take time to settle, time to explain themselves, time to be validated. And life doesn't wait for any of that. So without making a big announcement, you stopped letting emotions sit in the driver's seat. You still feel things, you're human, but you no longer build decisions inside those feelings. You extract the information and move on. That's the part people don't understand. They think calm means detached, or worse, uncaring. What they don't see is that you already went through the emotional phase when no one was watching. You've cried in private, wrestled with disappointment, replayed conversations in your head at 3 a.m., and come out the other side with clarity. By the time the situation shows up again, you're already done processing. To them, it looks like you're cold. In reality, you're finished. Emotional reactions used to cost you time. They pulled you into arguments that went nowhere and explanations that changed nothing. You noticed the pattern. Every time emotions led, solutions stalled, so you made a quiet switch. Now, when something happens, your first instinct isn't to defend, complain, or explode. It's to ask what can actually be done. That shift alone puts you in a different category. People around you still expect the old version, the one who would react, explain, or get visibly affected. When that doesn't happen, they feel off balance. They keep talking, adding pressure, raising their tone, hoping to trigger something familiar. Nothing comes. You're already working on the fix while they're still processing the feeling. This isn't emotional suppression. Suppression leaks. This is emotional efficiency. You let emotions do their job quickly and then step aside. That's why your responses feel clean, your decisions firm, and your presence heavier than your words. You're not trying to prove anything. You're just solving what's in front of you. And when people finally notice, it hits them hard. You're not playing the emotional game anymore, and that changes the entire dynamic. Number 2, you treat crises like raw material, not personal attacks. Most people experience a crisis as something that happens to them. It feels insulting, unfair, almost targeted. Their first response is emotional self-defense, anger, blame, panic, or a long explanation about why this shouldn't be happening. You moved past that stage. Somewhere along the way, you realized that taking a crisis personally wastes the one thing it actually offers: usable information. So instead of flinching, you started paying attention. When something breaks, your mind doesn't rush to protect your ego. It goes straight to assessment. What failed? Why it failed? What this failure exposes? You treat the situation the way a mechanic treats a broken engine, not as an attack, but as a system revealing its weak points. That alone puts you ahead, because while others are still offended, you're already learning. This approach didn't come from comfort. It came from being forced to deal with problems repeatedly, often without support. After a while, you noticed that reacting emotionally never fixed anything. It just added noise. The moment you stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "What can I use from this?" everything changed. Pressure stopped feeling like punishment and started feeling like input. That's why crises don't paralyze you. They sharpen you. You break them down into parts, strip out what's useless, and keep what helps you move forward. Other people see chaos. You see structure trying to emerge. And that difference shows in how fast you recover and how little drama follows you. To outsiders, this can look unsettling. They expect outrage, fear, or collapse. Instead, they see focus. They're venting while you're adjusting. They're still narrating the disaster while you're quietly redesigning your next move. It creates an uncomfortable gap. They feel exposed because the crisis that overwhelmed them barely slowed you down. You're not immune to stress. You're just no longer impressed by it. You don't deny the difficulty. You deny it control over your thinking. Every crisis becomes material for refinement, not proof of failure. And once people notice that problems don't weaken you but feed your growth, they realize something important has shifted. You're not surviving situations anymore, you're using them. Number 3, you stopped seeking fairness and started engineering outcomes. Most people are obsessed with fairness. They measure every situation by whether it aligns with their sense of justice, whether someone got what they deserve, or whether the rules were applied evenly. It sounds noble, but in reality it's a trap. Chasing fairness keeps you reactive, waiting for external forces to align before taking action. You broke free from that mindset. Somewhere along the way, you realize fairness is not a tool, it's a distraction. What actually matters is results. What actually matters is control over the end game. You don't wait for the universe, for people, or for circumstances to be just. You see the raw mechanics of the situation, the variables, the weaknesses, the levers, and you manipulate them. That's how you turn an impossible-looking scenario into a solution. While they're stuck counting who's right and who's wrong, you're already reshaping the outcome to your advantage. They panic because fairness is all they understand. You operate in results, and results aren't bound by morality or expectations. They're bound by logic and execution. This shift didn't happen overnight. It came from repeated experiences where fairness failed you. People lied, rules bent against you, and life gave you consequences without rhyme or reason. And every time you learned one brutal truth: Waiting for fairness will get you crushed, but engineering outcomes will get you free. You stopped asking for approval, validation, or even acknowledgement, because you realized the world rarely distributes justice evenly. You started asking one question instead: how do I get to the result I need with what I have right now? That mindset makes you uncomfortable for others without trying. They still argue, debate, or complain, hoping to invoke fairness. You quietly move the pieces on the board. They're shocked because they expected reaction. They didn't expect precision. You're not just surviving injustice, you're using it as fuel. Every imbalance becomes an advantage, every unfair rule a tool. And when they finally see it, the realization hits them like a punch. Fairness never mattered to you, but you always mattered to the outcome. That's why they gasp. You're operating on a completely different plane. Number 4, you don't need to be understood to be effective. Most people live their lives desperate to be understood. Every move, every word, every decision is accompanied by an unspoken hope. Someone will get it. They want acknowledgement, validation, agreement. They believe clarity is the foundation of influence. You broke that illusion. Somewhere along the way, you realized that understanding is optional when execution is undeniable. People don't need to grasp your reasoning to feel the impact of your actions. Results speak louder than explanations ever could. This is why your presence unsettles them. They're still stuck on the idea that persuasion and explanation are necessary to lead or influence. You, on the other hand, operate without that crutch. You act decisively, solve problems, and shift outcomes, regardless of whether anyone fully sees your method. They expect dialogue, debate, or approval. You offer none. They try to question, challenge, or control, but your effectiveness isn't contingent on their comprehension. That silence, that unbothered motion, they misread it as weakness. In reality, it's precision. You don't spend time justifying, rationalizing, or defending. You analyze, plan, and execute. Their confusion doesn't slow you. Misinterpretation doesn't derail you. They can mislabel you, misjudge your intentions, even misunderstand your end game. But the results arrive exactly as you designed them. That gap between expectation and reality creates tension, a kind of invisible pressure that makes your presence heavier than your words. They gasp because they realize their perception is irrelevant to your progress. You're proof that influence and efficiency don't require consensus. This approach didn't come from arrogance, it came from necessity. After being misunderstood too many times, after seeing people argue over your motives instead of addressing the problem, you stopped investing in approval. You stopped letting comprehension dictate action. You learned that control, impact, and results exist independently of being understood. And once you accepted that, you moved into a space almost nobody else dares to occupy. A space where effectiveness becomes its own language, and everyone else is left scrambling to translate. They're gasping because they can't read you, can't predict you, and most of all, can't stop you. Number 5, you removed ego from decision-making and it made you dangerous. Ego is subtle. It hides behind pride, insecurity, stubbornness, and even ambition. Most people think ego is strength. They confuse being unshakable with being immovable. You realized it's the exact opposite. Ego clouds judgment, slows reaction, and makes decisions personal. It turns solutions into battles and outcomes into status points. You decided to strip it away. You stopped letting identity, pride, or fear of being wrong dictate your choices. The moment you did, everything changed. Without ego, you became fluid. You can pivot without shame, concede without loss, and strike decisively without hesitation. Situations no longer dictate your emotional investment. They dictate your strategy. That's why you're unpredictable. People who rely on reading reactions, manipulating pride, or triggering defensiveness can't touch you anymore. There's no trigger, no handle, no predictable pattern. You respond only to reality, to logic, and to results. That's why they start gasping. They're encountering a version of you that doesn't exist in their playbook. Being free of ego doesn't make you careless or cold. It makes your decisions sharper. You don't get caught in imagined slights or imagined stakes. You can absorb criticism, rejection, or failure without them becoming emotional obstacles. When others spiral because of perceived disrespect or imagined threats, you stay functional, focused, and calculating. That creates a quiet, almost uncomfortable dominance. People sense it even if they can't name it. They feel the weight of someone who doesn't care about appearances, approval, or being right. This isn't learned from books. It's learned from experience. When you've been burned, underestimated, or cornered, and you see how ego costs more than it gains. The clarity comes from seeing the advantage in detachment. Ego becomes a liability. Removing it doesn't just make you effective, it makes you dangerous in the purest sense. Dangerous not because you want to harm, but because nothing can stop you from taking action when action is required. And when people finally realize this, they can't reconcile it with their expectations. They're stunned, caught in disbelief, and gasping because the version of you they knew, reactive, defensive, predictable, is gone. The new version doesn't just move. It dominates quietly, efficiently, and without apology. Number 6, you learned faster by losing than they ever did by winning. Most people think winning teaches strength. They think success builds skill, confidence, and wisdom. It doesn't. Winning often blinds you. It lulls you into repetition, comfort, and overconfidence. You learned the opposite. You learned that losing is the real teacher, and it teaches faster, harder, and with more clarity than any victory ever could. Every setback exposed a flaw, every failure revealed a blind spot, and every mistake handed you raw, unfiltered knowledge that no success could replicate. You stopped fearing loss because you realized it's unavoidable. The key wasn't avoiding failure, it was extracting value from it. That made you ruthless in your efficiency. While others celebrated their wins, you dissected your losses, broke them into pieces, and rebuilt your strategy stronger than before. Every disappointment, every betrayal, every mistake became a blueprint. You didn't just survive it. You used it as material to sharpen instincts, anticipate moves, and predict outcomes that others couldn't even see. That's why you move differently. Your timing, your decisions, your intuition, they're all forged in fire. People around you still operate as if life is a series of rewards and punishments. They celebrate milestones and complain when things go wrong. You stopped doing that. You see each experience as input, as data, as lessons to be internalized and applied. That's why you rarely panic, rarely overreact, rarely stumble. Loss didn't break you. It taught you to anticipate and adapt. It rewired your thinking so that you're always 2 steps ahead, not because you're luckier, but because you've endured what they refuse to acknowledge. That kind of learning is invisible to most. They see your composure, your precision, and your confidence, and assume it came naturally. They gasp when they realize the truth. Your luck is forged from pain and failure. They would never survive without crumbling. You became formidable not by winning the easy battles, but by learning faster, harder, and smarter from every defeat. Loss didn't slow you down. It accelerated you. Number 7, you stopped asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and started asking, "How does this work?" At some point, you realized that asking, "Why me?" was a dead end. It kept you stuck in frustration, in resentment, in emotional loops that solved nothing. Most people never move past that question. They dwell on injustice, complain about circumstances, and waste energy on blame. You made a different choice. You shifted the question from personal grievance to analytical clarity. You started asking, how does this work? And suddenly, every situation became a lesson, not a punishment. That shift rewired the way you approach life. Problems no longer feel like personal attacks. They feel like puzzles waiting to be solved. Obstacles aren't insults, they're data points. Every unexpected twist, every failure, every setback is now an opportunity to understand the system beneath the chaos. You don't waste time feeling betrayed or unlucky. You observe, dissect, and extract the mechanics that control the outcome. That's why your decisions are faster, cleaner, and deadlier effective. People around you panic because they're still narrating the story of their suffering while you're already designing the next move. This approach changed everything. It made patience a tool instead of a burden, observation a weapon, and calculation your default state. Emotional reaction became optional because it no longer dictated your actions. While others spiral in search of meaning, you harvest information. While they complain about unfairness, you exploit patterns. That gap between them and you grows every day, quietly, invisibly, until it becomes undeniable. They gasp because they can't trace your reasoning, can't predict your responses, and can't provoke a reaction that slows you down. You're untouchable not because you're untouchable by chance, but because you've learned the language of outcomes instead of excuses. You moved from asking for reasons to understanding mechanisms. You stopped looking for fairness, for sympathy, or for justification. You started looking for leverage, for understanding, for the next move. And once people see it, the realization hits. You're operating on a plane they never even imagined. You're no longer a participant in chaos. You're the engineer quietly rewriting the rules. Number 8, you don't chase control, you remove variables. Most people think control means force, influence, or dominance. They try to micromanage, manipulate, or convince others to bend to their will. That's exhausting and ineffective. You discovered a far sharper truth. Control isn't about fighting the world. It's about simplifying it. You don't chase control over people, events, or outcomes. You strip away the unnecessary, the unpredictable, and the volatile. You remove the variables that create chaos, and suddenly, the world bends to the order you quietly establish. That's why your moves feel effortless to others. They see the outcome, but not the method. They're still juggling 10 dependencies, 10 opinions, 10 unpredictable elements, while you operate with 3, and those 3 are intentionally chosen. Every factor you allow into your space is either essential or advantageous. Everything else is eliminated, ignored, or neutralized. That's how you stay several steps ahead without raising your voice, without drama, without explaining yourself. You aren't forcing outcomes, you're engineering them by design. This mindset makes you both efficient and untouchable. People still try to push, pull, or provoke, assuming that pressure will break you. It doesn't. Most of their leverage comes from variables you've already removed. Their chaos, their manipulation, their emotional tactics. None of it lands because you built a structure that doesn't depend on them. That's why they gasp. They expected you to react, bend, or stumble, and instead you move silently, decisively, and precisely. Removing variables also sharpens focus. You no longer waste energy on what's irrelevant. Your attention, time, and resources flow toward the factors that actually matter. This isn't strategy by intuition alone. It's strategy by elimination. You've learned that influence isn't about overpowering the uncontrollable. It's about reducing the number of moving parts until the outcome becomes inevitable. People see your calm, your efficiency, your consistency, and think it's luck. But it's anything but. You didn't gain control. You removed what tried to control you, and that makes every action you take feel unstoppable, clean, and disturbingly precise. Number 9, you don't need motivation because you built structure. Most people rely on motivation like it's fuel, but motivation is unreliable. It comes and goes, flickering with mood, circumstances, and external validation. That's why most people start strong and burn out fast. You realized early that waiting to feel motivated was wasting your life. You stopped depending on emotion to carry you and built structure instead. Structure doesn't tire, waver, or disappear. It moves you forward whether you feel like it or not, and that makes all the difference. This isn't about routines or discipline alone. It's about creating a system where decisions are automatic, predictable, and effective. You've layered processes, habits, and standards into your life that guide action even when your brain protests. Tasks get done. Problems get solved. Goals move forward. Motivation becomes irrelevant because your environment, your methods, and your defaults do the work for you. You've removed the variable of mood from outcomes, and that makes you frighteningly consistent. People around you are still scrambling, waiting for inspiration or a spark, while you're quietly executing on autopilot. Structure also frees mental space. You don't waste energy debating whether you feel like doing something. Your mind isn't cluttered with excuses or guilt. Every action is pre-mapped and pre-approved by the system you created. That clarity makes your decisions faster, your responses sharper, and your presence heavier than your words. People notice it without realizing why. They see results, efficiency, and calmness that seem unnatural because they're still emotionally dependent on every circumstance. This shift makes you quietly unstoppable. While others collapse under fluctuating moods, emotional drama, or distraction, you keep moving forward. You're not motivated. You're inevitable. That's why they gasp. They can't manipulate you with guilt, fear, or flattery. You don't wait for fire to burn inside. You already built the engine that keeps running, no spark required. Every victory, every progress, every quiet move comes from the structure you engineered, not the chaos of fleeting inspiration. And that's a kind of power most people never even consider possible. Number 10. You can sit with uncertainty without rushing to relief. Most people are terrified of not knowing. Uncertainty triggers anxiety, panic, and impulsive decisions. They feel the pressure of unanswered questions and try to force clarity before it exists, often making the situation worse. You learn to do the opposite. You stopped chasing immediate relief and started sitting with the unknown, studying it, letting it reveal its patterns and weaknesses. That patience isn't passive, it's strategic. You've turned uncertainty into a tool rather than a threat. When others panic, you observe. When they demand immediate answers, you calculate. You've learned that rushing into decisions under pressure is usually the fastest route to failure. Waiting, holding your position, and understanding the mechanics of the situation gives you the advantage. You don't act because you feel compelled. You act because you know it's time, and when you do, your moves are precise, calculated, and devastatingly effective. That difference is what leaves people gasping. They expect flinching. They expect panic. Instead, they find someone unmoved, unhurried, and already ahead. Sitting with uncertainty also rewires your confidence. You no longer need constant reassurance from results, people, or circumstances. You trust your judgment, your patience, and your ability to navigate complexity. This calm in chaos becomes a quiet pressure on everyone else. They feel the weight of your presence without understanding it. They're reacting to your stillness while they're spinning in their fear of the unknown. This skill is invisible until it's undeniable. People only notice when outcomes shift, when situations they thought were unstable stabilize around you, and when your choices land perfectly because you waited, observed, and calculated rather than rushed. They gasp because what feels impossible to them feels inevitable coming from you. You've trained your mind to withstand the discomfort of uncertainty, to extract insight from it, and to use it as leverage. While the world scrambles for answers, you quietly turn indecision into strategy. hesitation into advantage, and unpredictability into control. That's why uncertainty doesn't touch you, it serves you. Number 11, you stopped needing external validation and it collapsed their leverage. Most people are quietly addicted to approval. Compliments, recognition, praise, these are the strings that control behavior. People bend, comply, and even sacrifice their own judgment to earn acknowledgement. You realize that dependence is a weakness. The moment you stopped needing anyone's validation, you removed their power to influence, manipulate, or control you. Suddenly, the levers they thought they held were empty, and that silence is terrifying to those who thrived on it. Without seeking approval, your decisions became cleaner, sharper, and uncompromised. You no longer paused to weigh how others would perceive your choices, no longer hesitated out of fear of judgment, and no longer allowed opinion to dictate direction. You operate by results, logic, and principle alone. That shift is subtle at first, but devastating in impact. People who once pulled strings by making you seek acceptance are left flailing. They have influence, but you no longer respond. That's why they gasp. They realize the tools that guided their world suddenly have no effect. This independence rewires relationships. People who tried to sway you with guilt, pressure, or praise find themselves negotiating with someone untouchable. They can argue, complain, or flatter. You stay unaffected. Your freedom doesn't come from confrontation. It comes from indifference to their reactions. What they thought was control was always conditional on your compliance. You remove that condition, and suddenly the landscape shifts in your favor. Not needing external validation also accelerates growth. You focus entirely on outcomes, efficiency, and mastery without distractions. You measure success by your own standards, not the applause or envy of others. That clarity makes you faster, more decisive, and quieter in your dominance. While they scramble to influence, debate, and manipulate, you act, you move, you execute. And when they finally understand, they're caught off guard, breathless and gasping, because the version of you that could be bent or swayed no longer exists. You've collapsed their leverage without effort, and the realization leaves a weighty, unmistakable impression. You're operating in a space they can't reach. Number 12, you treat people as they show up, not as you hope they could be. Most people live in a fantasy version of others. They hope, imagine, and constantly give chances based on who they wish people were, instead of seeing who they actually are. That hope feels noble, but it's a trap. It clouds judgment, wastes energy, and leaves you exposed to manipulation. You stopped doing that. You stopped measuring people by potential, promises, or intentions. You started measuring them by behavior, by actions, by what they actually deliver. That shift is simple, but it changes everything. By treating people as they show up, you stop being surprised. You no longer let disappointment, frustration, or betrayal catch you off guard because you've already seen the patterns. You see the consistency or the lack of it, and you respond accordingly. You give energy where it's earned, respect where it's justified, and consequences where it's necessary. That clarity makes your interactions precise and your boundaries almost surgical. Others see it as cold, but it's actually ruthlessly accurate. You're not punishing anyone, you're aligning reality with action. This mindset also makes you immune to manipulation. People who once relied on charm, excuses, or promises can't trick you. They can say whatever they want, spin whatever story they like, but you respond to reality, not fiction. That creates tension, because most of the world operates on hope and illusion. They expect you to play the same game. When you don't, they're thrown off balance. They try to provoke reactions, they test limits, they gaslight. But their tactics fail because you're seeing clearly, responding firmly, and not bending to expectation. The result is efficiency in relationships and decision-making. You conserve energy, reduce friction, and remove drama before it even escalates. People notice it even if they can't articulate why. They feel the difference between someone who negotiates with reality and someone who negotiates with fantasy. That's why they gasp. They realize you're not hopeful, not forgiving, not naive. You're accurate, you're decisive. You're untouchable in your assessment because you deal with facts, not wishes. And that simple, brutal clarity puts you leagues ahead of everyone still trapped in expectation. Number 13, you don't confuse kindness with self-sacrifice anymore. Most people think being kind means giving without boundaries, bending until it hurts, and sacrificing themselves for the comfort of others. That's not kindness. That's depletion disguised as virtue. You learn the hard way that self-sacrifice often invites exploitation, drains energy, and creates dependency. At some point, you realize there's a line between being good and being used. Kindness doesn't require surrender. It requires wisdom, discernment, and control. Once you understood that, everything changed. You can be generous, supportive, and considerate without losing yourself in the process. You help where it's meaningful, where it's respected, and where it actually produces value. You don't overextend just to be seen as nice, and you don't let manipulation masquerade as a call for compassion. That subtle shift makes your presence unnerving for people who relied on your former willingness to overgive. They expect compliance, exhaustion, or emotional overcommitment, and when that doesn't come, they're caught off guard. That's why they gasp. You've redefined the rules without announcing it. This approach makes your influence cleaner and your energy untouchable. You no longer waste resources on drama, guilt, or unreciprocated effort. You don't bend for approval, and you don't compromise your trajectory to soothe insecurity or guilt in others. Your acts of kindness become precise. They have purpose and impact, not weightless sentimentality. People around you sense the difference immediately. Your generosity no longer feels negotiable or exploitable. It commands respect because it comes from strength, not weakness. That doesn't make you cold. It makes you intentional. You operate with clarity about who deserves your energy and who doesn't, and that clarity magnifies your presence. Others still confuse kindness with weakness, so when they encounter you, it's a shock. They realize their usual tactics, please, manipulation, flattery, or guilt, no longer work. Your kindness doesn't collapse into compromise. It's deliberate, controlled, and effective. You've mastered the balance, humane without being exploitable, strong without being cruel, and precise without being distant. And that balance, rare and disarming, leaves people stunned because it's impossible to predict or bend. You've become untouchable in the way you give, and that is quietly powerful. Number 14, you became solution-oriented in a world addicted to drama. Most people thrive on drama. They inflate problems, overreact to setbacks, and turn every minor conflict into a performance. It's exhausting, chaotic, and predictable. You stopped playing that game. Somewhere along the line, you decided that drama adds noise, not clarity, and you began focusing solely on solutions. That doesn't mean you ignore problems. It means you engage with them differently. You dissect, you analyze, and you act with precision, while everyone else is still caught in emotional loops. That shift changes everything around you. People are used to spectacle, to outrage, to emotional escalation. They expect you to participate, to raise your voice, to argue, to be swept along by the tension. When you don't, it creates a kind of dissonance. They feel it before they understand it. Your calm isn't weakness, it's purpose. Your composure isn't detachment, it's efficiency. You're not avoiding the chaos, you're outpacing it. While others perform, you execute. While they're consumed by reactions, you're shaping outcomes. That difference unsettles them because it exposes how irrational, impulsive, and ineffective their usual methods really are. Being solution-oriented also makes you decisive in a way that others can't replicate. You don't waste energy explaining, complaining, or debating endlessly. You identify the variables, test possibilities, and implement fixes without delay. The contrast is stark. Where they see complexity and conflict, you see a series of steps to manage. People notice your results, your speed, and your calm, and they can't reconcile it with the drama they've built their lives around. That's why they gasp. They realize you don't operate by the same rules, and nothing they do can rattle your process. This approach doesn't just make you effective, it makes you unstoppable. You aren't distracted by pettiness, gossip, or emotional noise. You absorb what's necessary, discard the rest, and act. Drama collapses around you because it doesn't stick. People who rely on chaos to influence or impress are left exposed and powerless. You've become the anomaly in a world addicted to spectacle. And when that finally hits them, it's jarring, unavoidable, and undeniable. Your presence solves problems while theirs only creates more, and that reality leaves them stunned. The truth is, what separates you from the rest isn't luck, timing, or even raw talent. It's your way of moving through life differently. While the world is busy reacting, overthinking, and performing, you've built systems, removed distractions, and sharpened your focus until your presence alone shifts outcomes. You don't react emotionally because you've already processed, learned, and adapted. You don't treat crises as personal attacks. You treat them as raw material for growth. You stop chasing fairness, validation, or approval, and instead engineered outcomes, removed variables, and built structures that carry you forward, whether the world understands it or not. Every loss, every challenge, every chaotic situation became fuel for your precision, patience, and strategy. You learned to sit with uncertainty without panicking, to act decisively when others are still debating, and to see people for who they actually are rather than who you wish them to be. You've mastered kindness without self-sacrifice, efficiency without arrogance, and calm without disengagement. You've become solution-oriented in a world addicted to drama, untouchable in a way most people don't even realize is possible. What they perceive as cold, ruthless, or untouchable is really clarity, strategy, and a refusal to allow noise, emotional, social, or circumstantial, to dictate your path. This is more than just surviving. It's a total recalibration of how life is approached. You are no longer a participant in chaos. You are the one quietly orchestrating outcomes while everyone else scrambles. That's why they gasp. That's why they can't touch you. That's why, whether they know it or not, your presence is disruptive in the best possible way. You've redefined what power looks like: calm, precise, and unstoppable. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next deep dive into mastery and strategy. Hit the like button to show you're ready to level up, comment below, and share your thoughts or experiences. Let's start a conversation about moving beyond chaos and mastering your own rules. And don't forget to share this with someone who needs to see what it really looks like to operate at this level. Your growth, your clarity, and your execution are only getting sharper from here, and this is just the beginning. God bless you.